Welcome back to the Warehouse Podcast. My name is Jesse. The Orioles took 2 out of 3 from the Braves at home. But before I get into that, Bet Online is your number one source for NBA Finals and Stanley Cup Finals this year. Every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. When the game's over, head on over to the online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker or unwind with one of over 150 slot games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. Use promo code BELIEVE for 50% off welcome bonus on your first deposit. And Bet Online is the game starts here. All right. So, as I said, the Orioles did take 2 out of 3 from the Atlanta Braves at home. It was a good series overall, I would say. The Braves are, this is a Ronald Acuna-less Braves team. But even with that said, this is still a very solid team, but we did catch them at the right time. They were in the midst of a losing streak when we began the series with them. They're about, I think at this point, after the Orioles series, 6 games over 500. So it's a little bit of a bit of a down year by their standards, but they're still, of course, very competitive and in the midst of trying to return to the playoffs and hopefully for them win a World Series. So yeah, the Orioles did take 2 out of 3. They were 3 pretty close games. There weren't any blowouts. They were more or less competitive. And they were some of them were exciting games. So basically in game one, it was Albert Suarez versus Max Fried, and I would imagine most of the listeners here know Max Fried, one of the best pitchers in the National League, among the top pitchers in the National League. Has been a very, very good, reliable left-handed pitcher for years now. And Albert Suarez went toe to toe with him and outpitched him. Albert Suarez in that game did really well. He pitched 5 1/3 shutout innings. He had 3 walks and 4 strikeouts, allowed 4 hits. And he did get removed in the middle of the 6th inning. But really, really good start from Albert Suarez. He's done, I mean, you could just tell even from like his ERA, his 1.61 ERA, he's been fantastic. Perhaps he hasn't given the Orioles a ton of length from the starting rotation, but that's more than fine. And he's still like doing great with his, very microscopic ERA. He's been really, really impressive. And he continued that and he beat Max Fried. Of course, the offenses and stuff like this have a lot to do with that, but the Orioles were able to get to Fried. And yeah, they ended up winning the game 4-0. In the 2nd inning, Jorge Mateo had just come off the concussion IL, and in his first at bat from returning, hit a really critical 3-run home run in a really big spot that put the O's up 3-0 at the time. And then later, the Orioles tacked on a run in the 6th on an Austin Hayes single. So the Orioles ended up winning the game 4-0. The pitching staff didn't need a lot of run support. But yeah, it was just a very, very solid game all around. Really exciting to see Jorge Mateo back, even though that means Connor Norby is no longer with the club. But even with all of that, the Orioles played a really solid all-around game in that game. And yeah, just positive. The bullpen didn't give up anything after Suarez was removed. And they went Webb, Cano, Perez, and Tate finished the game off in the 9th. It wasn't a save situation, so Kimbrel remained in the bullpen, and Tate pitched the 9th instead. So really good game. When we went to game two, also a very good game. This one was really exciting. Um, so of course, so Cade Povich started the game, pitched great, 6 innings, didn't give up anything, 6 strikeouts, no walks, and 5 hits. He looked really good. He looked comfortable, which is a big thing. And against this, even without Ronald Acuna, a somewhat scary lineup and offense for the Atlanta Braves, at least sections of it are scary. And they really do have some big boppers in this lineup. Of course, Matt Olson, and Marcelo Zuna, and Austin Riley. Riley is having a bit of a down year. But yeah, overall, Azuna and Olson in the lineup, that alone. And then of course they have other very solid compliments, Adam Duvall, but also at the top of the order, Michael Harris and Ozzy Albies. So yeah, basically, he did. Povich pitched great. Yeah, big improvement. Eventually we'll probably put out a podcast doing a deep dive on him. But he's only had 2 starts. One was not great, but the second start here was excellent. And things seem to be going smoothly. But Keegan Aiken came in to pitch the 8th inning and ended up giving up a home run to Matt Olson, who tied the game at 2. The Orioles didn't generate a lot of offense early in the game. And actually, it was the offense that we did have was in large part attributed to the speed of both Cedric Mullins and Jorge Mateo, which allowed us to score and generate sort of those 2 runs. So yeah, we were really benefited on that, beating out like infielder, like ground balls to the infielder, where there was one play where Mateo scored when Matt Olson tried to uh, throw home rather than taking the safe out at first. And yeah, Jorge Mateo was able to evade the tag and score, despite them trying to cut down the run at home. And he had also stolen second base earlier in the inning. And yeah, Cedric Mullins was out there too. So the Orioles were able to generate some offense based on their speed. They were able to scratch 2 runs across. And that seemed like everything was going smoothly until, of course, as I said, Matt Olson hit the 2-run home run off Keegan Aiken. And of course, one of the big injustices, at least in my eyes, in baseball, with how winning pitchers are assigned. A lot of the times, relievers come into the game, give up the lead, and then their team immediately gets it right back, and then they get the win. And that's what exactly happened in this case. When yeah, the Orioles immediately scored in the bottom half of the inning. Um, Brandon Hyde, got to give him a lot of credit in this situation. He pinch hit uh, Colton Cowser for Ryan O'Hearn. So in this situation, it wasn't a lefty righty thing or anything like that. Both O'Hearn and Cowser lefties. And yeah, so Cowser came up, pinch hit for O'Hearn, and in a big spot hit a critical 2-run home run, which did give the Orioles the permanent lead for the game in the bottom of the 8th. And Craig Kimbrell came in the 9th to finish it off and close it out, getting the save. So the Orioles won that game 4-2. And then yesterday, yeah, a bit unfortunate for how things worked out for the Orioles. Cole Irvin had a decent enough start, won 5 2/3, but he ended up giving 4 runs, 3 earned. He did get knocked around a bit. He gave up 9 hits. and gave up a walk. And he did have 8 strikeouts, which is interesting. He did put a string of strikeouts together, which, as we know, very much a contact pitcher. So the 8 strikeouts really stands out on his stat line for the day, especially given how many hits he had given up in the game. Yeah, and uh, unfortunately, Cole Irvin was pitching against Ronaldo Lopez, and he went 6 shutout innings. He was very, very dominant, had 8 strikeouts, and really didn't give up much of anything, just 2 hits and a walk. And basically from there, the Orioles were down 4-3 for a lot of the game. The Orioles, well, I should clarify, I guess. The Orioles were down 4-0 for a lot of the game, or 3-0 for a lot of the game. Um, the Braves did tack on a run in the sixth, to make it 4-0. And then the Orioles fought back, and you sort of got excited at this point. Kyle Stowers hit a big 3-run home run to put the Orioles back in the game to make it 4-3. We got that off the bullpen. And then after that, um, the Orioles weren't able to tie the game or take the lead. And then in the top of the ninth, the Braves tacked on 2 more runs against CNL Perez and went up 6-3, and that was good enough for Iglesias for the Braves to close the game out. So not it was an unfortunate game. Ozzy Albies offensively for the Braves was a menace for the Orioles in this game. He went 4 for 5, had 2 runs and an RBI. And it would have been nice for the Orioles to get the sweep. I think the Orioles are more or less content taking 2 out of 3 from the Braves, especially sort of given the pitching matchups headed into the series and stuff like that. The Orioles, were sort of more kind of outmatched in definitely this third game with Ronaldo Lopez and Cole Irvin. And then the Orioles were able, though, to take the game where they had Albert Suarez against Max Fried. Now, of course, Albert Suarez on paper this year has been really good. But in general, I think generally you like Max Fried's just his history, his consistency. I mean, he's a great pitcher overall. So it was amazing that Albert Suarez in that game was able to outpitch him. So the Orioles did get 2 out of 3. It could have, things could have gone differently. It could have been better. It could have been 3 out of 3. But overall, I think the Orioles are at least satisfied with this result. So I wanted to spend a little time here talking about what the Orioles have coming up. So this is obviously there's been a lot of discussion just about the Orioles' really, really rough month of June, only having 1 off day in the entire month. Eli talked a little bit about this a while on a previous podcast. And I just sort of wanted to talk about a little bit what was coming up for the Orioles in June. So immediately starting today, the Orioles begin a 3-game series at home against the Phillies. Now, this is going to be a really exciting series. The Phillies have been a consistent playoff team the last several years. They seem and appear to be a World Series contender again this year. So this is a really big series for the Orioles. I think, of course, the standings and those sort of implications are important, especially given the Yankees leading the division at this point. But I think also just from a confidence perspective, I think it's important for the Orioles to be doing well in these sorts of series, because these are the sorts of teams that we might get paired up with in the playoffs or in a World Series. And we need to sort of have, I think, some confidence established and built in that the Orioles are able to win these series against really, really good teams that may not be as familiar and are not as routine and as regular on the Orioles schedule. So if the Orioles get the Yankees in the playoffs, of course there's going to be a lot of pressure, but the Orioles will have played them a bit more and will know a bit more about what to expect rather than like a wild card team like whoever the National League representative is in the World Series, or even if the Orioles get paired up against a team in the playoffs, like we did last year against the Rangers, um, not still an American League team, so we play them more often than a National League team, but definitely not as often as like another American League East team. So I think it's good that the Orioles end up having series like against the Phillies, who are having a really good year. Unfortunately, I do not like the Phillies. So it's really important that I think the Orioles at least hold their own against the Phillies. Because if granted, the Orioles making the World Series, there are a lot of steps to get to that point, but it is possible for this team. And if the Orioles get to that point, I want us to feel comfortable being in that situation. And if we do end up in a hypothetical situation where we are the play in the World Series against the Phillies, it would be great for us not to have been swept by the Phillies when we did play that, and for that to be in the back of the players' minds or Brandon Hyde's minds as we enter and go into the series. So I do think these things are really good. Like I think it is important that even if the Braves do look like and are a better team when we get to the playoffs, I do think it is still important that the Orioles won 2 out of 3, and we've established that we can be competitive against the Braves. So just like it'll be really important, I think, for the Orioles to do well and to at least hold their own against the Phillies and not get sort of embarrassed off the field, right? So these 3 games against the Phillies sort of demonstrate exactly what's going to be difficult. Um, so in game 1 tonight, the Orioles are throwing Kyle Bradish, who you would normally feel really, really excited and confident about. And, we look forward to him having a good start. I'm not questioning that. But for the Phillies, they're throwing Ranger Suarez. And Ranger Suarez, of course, is a fantastic pitcher. He's relatively young. So he's like, I would say he's an up and coming star, but at this point, I think he's pretty established star, even if he is a little bit not as widely known, perhaps, as like some of the more established guys in the league. Although he has pitched in the playoffs and pitched really well in the playoffs, so maybe he has more name recognition at this point than I'm really giving him credit for. But regardless, Ranger Suarez is just having a ridiculous year this year. He's 10-1. He has an ERA under 2, and he has a .85 WHIP, which, for those who don't know, anything under 1 really, for a starting pitcher, a WHIP under 1 is absolutely fantastic, and something under .9 even is just even more absurd and ridiculous. So Ranger Suarez is doing that. Definitely, if he keeps the season up like this, I think he would be probably a favorite to win the NL Cy Young. Of course, there's room for regression, but he's just having an amazing year. So that's what the Orioles have to deal with coming into this series. So we have Ranger Suarez in the first game that the Orioles are going to somehow have to try to find a way to manage some sort of offense off of, or either that or Kyle Bradish is going to have to throw, 7 or 8 shutout innings, and the O's are going to have to rely on the bullpen to decide the game. So it'll be an interesting test to see if the Orioles can manufacture any offensive production off Ranger Suarez. And I think it is, in the long run, I do think it is good that the Orioles are going to see a pitcher of his caliber. So that's a really exciting pitching matchup, and we will see what happens tonight. In game two, the Orioles, I think it's fair to say, have an edge in the pitching matchup. It's going to be Taijuan Walker against Grayson Rodriguez. And that is going to be another interesting pitching matchup. Taijuan Walker is a very good pitcher. He's a very solid pitcher. His on paper numbers this year are a bit worse than he normally is in years past. But he's a very, very competent middle of the road. I mean, he's a 3 probably in a lot of rotations, but in some I would say Taijuan Walker is a 2. And yeah, I mean, Taijuan Walker is a very solid pitcher, and it's not necessarily going to be an easy task for the Orioles to try to get some offensive production, even though I think it'll be a big sigh of relief for the Orioles to be hitting against Taijuan Walker after we have to deal with Ranger Suarez in game one. And then in game three, it's also another really exciting pitching matchup. It's going to be Zach Wheeler and Corbin Burns. So definitely really interested to see what's going to happen. The Orioles are at home, so hopefully we're going to have a bit of an edge there from home field advantage perspective. So that should be good. I think the Orioles have a clear advantage in the Grayson Rodriguez pitching matchup, at least currently. Not saying that necessarily would have been the case last year or the year before, but I think the Orioles do have the edge in that one. And I would more or less say the Wheeler and Burns one is a toss up. If you really want to look at the numbers, maybe you could make a case for Wheeler having the edge in that matchup. But overall, I think that one could go either way. And then the Ranger Suarez game is the one where the Orioles are really going to have to find a way to potentially overcome the odds to win that one. So the Orioles have 3 at home against the Phillies. Going to talk just a little bit about the schedule here. So they do have an off day after that. The Orioles better enjoy it because that is the only off day that they will have this entire month, as I referenced earlier. So the Orioles do have an off day after that series against the Phillies. And then after that, the Orioles head to the Bronx to play the Yankees for 3 games. Then they head to Houston to play the Astros for 3 games. And then they return home to play the Guardians for 3, and then the Rangers for 4. All of that is consecutive without any off days in the middle of that. And then after the Rangers, then the Orioles finally have an off day as we enter July. So basically, so far this month, the Orioles are 9-4. We do have 16 games remaining this month. And it is really important that the Orioles do not implode during this stretch. Now, there hasn't really been any indication that the Orioles will implode or that the Orioles are likely to implode. So I'm not expecting, and I'm not bracing for a 4-12 month going the rest of the way. I don't think that'll happen. But there is some pressure the Orioles are facing, given this top of the division race for first place between the Yankees and the Orioles, and given that the Orioles are a couple and a half games behind the Yankees for first place, there is a lot of pressure for the Orioles to try to, at least at a bare minimum, keep pace. And if things go really, really well, if the Orioles end this month in the same position, still 2.5 games behind the Yankees, I think the Orioles can call that a success and be happy with that. So if the Orioles just get past June, then the Orioles will steadily have more off days. Will be able to rest more guys. So I think immediately for the Orioles, it's really important for the O's to just get to the end of June, and then sort of think about where they're at. It'll still be before the end of the at the end of June will still be before the deadline. So if we do have a little regression, or if we do fall back 2 games, let's say, more behind the Yankees, the Orioles will be able to do some things, and we'll still have time to do things at the deadline to sort of fix and perhaps compensate for any lack of ground, that or any lost ground that the Orioles accrued during this month. So I think just looking at the schedule, I'm at least hoping that the Orioles in these next 16 games can at least go 10-6. I think that now maybe that's maybe I should not push it that much, and maybe I should even be satisfied if the Orioles go 8-8. The Orioles do have most of these games at home. That's the positive. So 10 out of the 16 games are going to be at home. The Phillies games, the Guardians, and the Rangers games are all at home. So the Orioles do have that going for them. I mean, maybe I should be content if the Orioles just go 8-8, and split these 16 games. But if that does sort of leave some room and provide the Yankees an opportunity, if they keep sort of winning at the rate they're winning, if the Orioles just go 500 the rest of this month, the Orioles will lose ground in that sort of first place race, or that race for first place in the division. So I'm sort of hoping that the O's go at least 10-6. If the O's do anything better than that, I'm going to be really excited. And we can really be celebratory about that. But I think sort of, looking at the situation, looking that we are going to be playing 3 in the Bronx, it's very likely the O's at least lose 2 of them. So not necessarily very likely. It's, I would say maybe slightly more likely the O's lose 2 out of 3 than win out of two out of 3. So yeah, it's not a big condemnation, or it's not set in stone that the O's will have a losing series when they play the Yankees. But the Yankees are very good. So I think just when you're looking at the schedule, I think sort of a realistic ambition for the Orioles is to go 10-6, not lose too much ground in the wild card race. And then once we get out of June, then we could think about how are we going to make this final push to eclipse the Yankees. As Tyler had mentioned last podcast, the Orioles do play the Yankees a good amount coming up, not just in this upcoming series, but beyond that. So there is room for the Orioles in head-to-head matchups to make up ground. So yeah, so that's sort of what we're looking at. It's not exciting, but so far the Orioles, as I said, we're 9-4 this month. So if the O's just keep doing that, roughly winning 2 out of 3 games for the rest of this month, things will be smooth. So we'll see if that actually happens. But yeah, it is a really critical time in the Orioles schedule. We do have some difficulty coming up with some of the teams we're playing, so it's not going to be an easy stretch, but hopefully the O's can at least emerge above 500, and hopefully even a little better than that. So all right, so once again, want to thank BetOnline for sponsoring this video. Make sure you like and subscribe to the show, follow the show, subscribe to us on YouTube. We do have a YouTube channel. If you want to follow us, you can follow us on Twitter and on Instagram at The Warehouse Pod. And if you want to get in contact with the show, you can feel free to email us by emailing thewarehousepod@gmail.com. So, anyway, that'll wrap it up. Thank you so much for listening. This has been the Warehouse Podcast. My name is Jesse, and go O's.